Hello, this is Angie Homley-Zabo, your friendly neighborhood art teacher. Today I'm going to show you how to take something as simple as a tin can from here to here to here. I hope you enjoy making some art with me. Step one for any project you're going to make out of a tin can is to cut open the tin can. For me, the easiest way to do that has been to find a sharp object. I'm going to use this awl. And I poke a hole just below the curve in the can. Open it up a little bit. If you don't have an awl, you can use a pin or something else like that. This gives me a hole to pop my scissors in. So I'm going to pop my scissors in there, and I'm going to take little snips all the way around. Once I've snipped all the way around, you're going to have a view of the biggest issue with this project that you have to be aware of. Cut tin cans, cut aluminum cans tend to be very sharp, and all these little points that I've gotten so far on here from snipping it open are super, super sharp. So if you've got a pair of leather gloves or any other type of glove that you could put over your hand that's going to help you avoid getting cut, that's a really good idea. If you're under the age of 18, talk to your parents about doing this before you get started. I want to make sure that you're safe. The other thing you should make sure you have on are a pair of goggles or glasses, because sometimes when you're cutting metal, little pieces pop off at you. All right, I've cut the top off. Now I'm going to go to the next step, which is opening up the tin can. So my tin can ripped a little bit here, so I'm just going to start this process from this side. I'm just going to cut straight down to the bottom. And then once I'm there, I'm going to cut around, again, right above where that little rise is. All right, now I've got this cut open and I've got lots of really sharp edges. I want it to look more like this piece in the corner where it's nice and clean. So I'm going to take my scissors, I'm going to hold this flat, and I'm just going to trim off a little bit around the edges. And what I'm left with is a tin can that doesn't have any sharp edges or overly sharp edges. I still need to be really careful about corners and edges here, not to run my finger along them, but it wants to curl on me. So the next step in getting my nice flat object is I'm going to take this and I'm going to reverse the curl. So I'm going to roll it back on itself and just kind of push and rock it back and forth. When you do that, you'll start to reverse that curl and get a straighter sheet. Your next step in a process like this is always deciding what you want to make. I'm making some earrings. I felt like this aluminum from these cans is so lightweight that it would be ideal for a pair of earrings or pairs of earrings. It also allows me to play around with lots of different ideas with different shapes. Once you decided on the object, then you decide on the design and how you want to put those different shapes and elements of art together to make a piece of art. So I'm doing a series of pieces that have circles, some diamonds and some squares, some more freeform pieces, and I'm cutting out an oak leaf shape to show you a specific technique later on in the process. So my next step is getting the design laid out on the metal. For the geometric shapes, I use stencils and I just traced it using a Sharpie. For these more freeform shapes, I made a template out of paper and traced that. And then for the oak leaf, I practiced drawing the oak leaf. And once I figured out how I wanted to do that, I free drew it on the aluminum. Once you've got everything spaced out, then it's time to cut. To do that, I'm just going to use a simple pair of scissors. And again, I'm going to be careful when I'm using this metal to not run my hand along any edge, as that would cause a cut. You'll notice that I'm moving pretty slow. As I'm cutting, I'm turning the metal, which gives me a nice smooth cut. It's a little easier to get a smooth cut turning your metal or your paper than it is just turning the cutting tool. Okay, our next step in making these pieces is to work with texture, and you can see a variety of different textures that I've achieved on these pieces here. The first series of textures I'm going to show you are related to a metals process called embossing, and using these soda cans is a really nice way to practice embossing because it's a lot easier on this thin aluminum than it would be on a thicker, heavier piece of silver, copper, or brass. So we're going to start with this circle here. So the circle started looking like this. The first thing I want to do before I start embossing, and I failed to do it here, is I want to put a hole through the metal. And this is where I'm going to hang my ear wire eventually to make this into an earring. So I'm just using an awl. You could use a pin. It's pretty easy to press through the metal sheet. To create this texture, all I did was use this seashell. It's a pretty heavy one, so I can push against it. I put my metal against it, and then I just use this wooden end of the wooden awl to push with some pretty significant pressure and rub the texture of the shell, and it transfers that texture to the metal. And then I would just rotate and go through the same process again over and over and over again until I get the texture you see here. I moved the shell because I wanted the lines to go in different directions. For this piece, I did another technique that involves pressing a texture into metal. Again, the first thing you'd want to do is to pop your hole in it. And then I just grabbed one of my pliers. It's a round plier. It has a little bit of a circle at the tip. And I just repeatedly push that into the surface. I did it on the back side of the metal, so you see the little dots coming towards you. So I'll flip it over, push on the back side. The next texture I want to show you involves this earring. So I've got a larger piece and a smaller piece. For the larger piece, all I did was take a pencil that's a little bit on the dull side. I flipped my piece to the back side, and you can see it here, and I drew a series of circles, and I'm pressing fairly hard, and then I flipped it over, and on the front side I put a little dot with the same pencil in the middle of each circle. And in the end, that's the look you get. The second piece that you can see here, I have added some color to, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. This is what it looked like before I added the color. So all I did for this one is I took this file. It has a bit of a point. It's not quite as sharp as my awl. And I did a series of lines in one direction on the front side. And then I crossed those lines again on the front. Once I'd done that whole series on the front, I flipped it over and I did a series that went in the opposite direction on the back, and then again in the opposite direction. And you can see how that kind of gives a faceted look to the metal itself. The other piece that I embossed on is this leaf. And I don't know how well the camera picks up the veins that I put into the leaf, but if I flip it on the back side, all I did to emboss the veins is again use this somewhat dull pencil, and then I drew with some pressure the veins going across the oak leaf. If you'll notice, I'm also working on this piece of cardboard. For embossing, when you're doing the lines, it's really important that you have something with a little bit of a give underneath the metal. If I did this right on my hard surface, you wouldn't get the same embossed lines. The other techniques that I used involve bending my metals using pliers. So I'm going to start with these little earrings here, these triangles. All I did for these guys is I took my round pliers, round needle nose pliers, and I went around the edges and I would grip and then twist, grip, twist. So I kind of twist left, twist right for earrings. So I went and did that around all the different edges on both the large and the small. And again, you're going to want to poke the holes in those earrings before you start. The last earring I want to show you is this guy, and he's kind of a fun one. I was really happy with the outcome of this piece, so I wanted to show you how I did that. So the first thing that I needed to do is set up some lines. So if you look really carefully at this piece, I've made a mark halfway through the square, and then I've divided that. So I have a mark at each of the quarters on each side here. And then you're just going to grab a straight edge and a Sharpie, and don't worry about the Sharpie lines. I'll show you how to get those off later. And I drew to each mark, which kind of creates a fan look in your piece. And I'm only going to do one half to demo because that's all you really need to see. Once you have the marks drawn, you're going to work from one side to the other, and you want to take a pair of flat pliers. And what I did, or I'm sorry, you want to start from the middle, not from the edge. You are going to grip the metal along that line, and then I'm just going to bend it to the left and then on the next line, I'm going to grip along that line, bend it up. Next line, I'm going to bend it down. So you just reverse directions, up, down, up, down, up, down. And then I would do the same thing on this side. You can see that creates a really nice zigzag. I'm really excited for this pair when it's done. So you can see how that one works. The next step that I did in my process was to add color to some of the metal, and I'll probably go back in and add more to these pieces as well. This was really pretty easy, and it goes along the same idea as using alcohol inks. I don't have alcohol inks, and at the time of this taping, it's a little difficult to get art supplies. So I experimented with my Sharpies, which are an alcohol-based marker. And I used acetone or nail polish to help me spread the ink. And it was pretty easy to do. Your first step would be taking your piece and just applying the ink. And for this piece, I just kind of scribbled in different directions all over. Now, in class, I always tell my students, if you're going to do something two of the same thing, and you want them to look exactly the same, you want to work on the same step on each piece at the same time. So I wouldn't totally finish this piece and then make a second one, but for the purposes of demo and a video, that's what works best. So they might end up looking a little bit more varied than I'd like, but that's okay. In this little piece, this little cap here, I have some nail polish remover. I'm just putting it on a non-reactive material and kind of dabbing it onto that piece. And if you watch, when I get that nail polish remover onto this surface, the Sharpie dissolves and it starts to move around. So I'm going to keep adding that until I've gotten the Sharpie to move around the whole piece. At this point, I would let it dry completely because I don't want to work on top of the wet acetone. So I have a piece that I worked with a little bit ahead of time, dried looking like this. You can see it's a little more similar to this first piece here. And then I decided I wanted a little more variation in my metal than that. So I went in and I drew back on top of the piece with a little bit of this black Sharpie. And then I just kind of dabbed acetone just on those black Sharpie spots. And you're kind of using it like you would use watercolor and a wet on wet technique to create a little bit of texture in your piece. Then I also went in where I didn't have any black spots and I dabbed a little here and there just because it reactivates that Sharpie and gets it to move around again. For my leaf, I used black Sharpie and I kind of scribbled down all of the veins. And then I went in with a dark green and then ended with a light green at the edge. And then I went in with the acetone and I just kind of let it float out to the edges a little bit because I wanted it to have a nice watery effect. Now, once this is dry, it hangs on to the metal pretty well. I'm rubbing pretty hard and I haven't had any of that move around at all. However, I sell jewelry professionally, and if I'm going to sell something to somebody, I want to make sure it lasts forever. So what I do with this, and what I do with any metal piece that I have a patina or any kind of color on, is I seal it with what's called Renaissance wax. And it works really beautifully. You just take a little bit on a cloth. You don't need much at all. You can see that you can really even see it on the cloth. And I'm just going to dab it on. I'm not going to rub it. I don't rub because I'm afraid it's going to move the color around. So I dab that. I would let it dry for about 5 minutes. And at the end of 5 minutes, I'm going to use a clean part of that same disposable cloth and I'm going to rub, and this will get nice and shiny. You can see it in the pictures at the end. It'll shine it up well and it'll hold that color nicely for a long, long time. Forever owns these earrings in the end. I hope you enjoyed my tutorial on how to play around with some soda cans and make some pretty cool pieces. I had a lot of fun of experimenting with different textures and the colors. I hope you do too. I think the best way that you can learn as an artist is by playing with your materials. So play away, enjoy.